If you tell my brother I said that, Julian whispered, his mouth an inch from my ear, I will actually die. I didn't move. I couldn't. His hand was still on my chest, right where he'd pushed me back against the kitchen counter 30 seconds earlier, and neither of us had figured out what to do with the silence that followed. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the hall, his brother, my roommate, was asleep, completely unaware that his little brother had just confessed something that would rearrange the next 6 months of my life. Said what? I asked, even though I knew exactly what. Julian's eyes dropped to my mouth for half a second. Just half a second. But I felt it in my spine. That I've been thinking about you since the day I moved my stuff into that guest room, he said. That I lie awake listening for your footsteps, because I like knowing you're close. That I don't know how to stop. That was the moment everything changed. Not with a kiss. Not yet. Just with the truth, spoken too quietly in a kitchen at 1 a.m., between two people who weren't supposed to want each other. This is the story of how that moment happened, and everything that came after that. My name is Theo, and 3 years ago, I answered a roommate listing that changed the shape of my whole life, though I didn't know it at the time. I was 23, freshly out of a lease I couldn't afford alone, and desperate enough to move in with a stranger named Adrian who seemed normal in his texts and turned out to be normal in person too. Which, honestly, felt like winning the roommate lottery. Adrian was easy to live with. He worked long shifts as a paramedic, came home smelling like hospital hand sanitizer, and fell asleep on the couch more nights than not. He was straight, unbothered by the fact that I wasn't, and generous in the specific way that people are when they've never had to think hard about who they are. We became friends slowly, the way roommates do, shared groceries becoming shared jokes becoming shared history. I liked my life. It was quiet, uncomplicated, contained. I had my job at a design studio downtown, my Sunday routine of running the river trail until my legs burned, my carefully arranged solitude that I told myself I preferred. I wasn't lonely. I was just alone, and I had convinced myself those were the same thing. Then, on a Tuesday in early spring, Adrian knocked on my door with an apologetic look on his face that I would later learn to associate with disaster. So my brother's coming to stay with us for a while, he said, just until he finds his own place. He's finishing grad school, and his lease fell through. It'll only be a few weeks. I said sure, of course, no problem. The way you say things when you have no idea what they're actually going to cost you. I had never met Julian. Adrian talked about him sometimes, the way older brothers talk about younger ones, half exasperated, half proud. Julian was the smart one, apparently. The one who'd gotten into a master's program studying something with graphs and equations I didn't understand. The one who'd had, according to Adrian, a rough couple of years that he never elaborated on and I never asked about. I pictured someone younger. Awkward, maybe. Someone who'd need the Wi-Fi password explained twice. I was not prepared for the person who showed up at our door 3 days later with 2 duffel bags and an expression like he already regretted needing help. Julian was not what I expected. He was 25, tall in an unshowy way, with dark curling hair he kept pushing out of his eyes, and the kind of face that looked serious until he smiled, and then looked like something else entirely. He had Adrian's jaw, but none of Adrian's ease. Where his brother moved through the world like nothing could touch him, Julian moved like he was bracing for something. You must be Theo, he said, setting his bags down just inside the door. Adrian talks about you like you're the reason this apartment doesn't look like a frat house. High praise, I said. I mostly just hide the dishes before they multiply. He laughed. A short, surprised sound, like he hadn't expected to laugh yet that day. And something in my chest did a strange, small flip that I chose to ignore entirely. The first week, we were polite in the way strangers sharing a bathroom have to be. He kept to the guest room mostly, working on his thesis at odd hours, existing on the kind of coffee that could strip paint. I'd catch him in the kitchen at 2 a.m. Sometimes, hunched over his laptop, and we'd exchange a few tired words before retreating to our separate corners of the apartment. It was the second week that things started to shift, in small ways I didn't notice until much later. He started leaving his door open when he worked. I started finding reasons to be in the kitchen longer than necessary. We began trading playlists, then opinions on the playlists, then arguments about the opinions that stretched late into the night and left us both laughing too hard over nothing in particular. Adrian, oblivious as ever, thought it was wonderful that his brother and his roommate were getting along. See, He said one evening, clapping me on the shoulder, "I told you he'd fit right in." He had no idea how right he was, in a way he definitely didn't mean. There is a particular kind of tension that builds without either person naming it, a slow accumulation of moments that mean nothing on their own and everything together. Ours built like that. It was in the way Julian would hand me a mug of tea without asking if I wanted one, because he'd learned I always did. It was in the way I started waiting up on the nights he had late study sessions, telling myself it was just because I wasn't tired yet. It was in the 3 seconds too long we'd hold eye contact during an argument about a movie, both of us forgetting what we'd been arguing about. One night in early April, we ended up on the fire escape outside the kitchen window, sharing a blanket because neither of us had thought to bring a jacket, watching the city do its quiet late-night thing below us. Julian was talking about his thesis, something about networks and connection, and I wasn't really listening to the words so much as the shape of his voice. "You're not even paying attention," he said, catching me. "I am. Networks. Connection. Very compelling. Liar." But he was smiling when he said it, and he didn't pull away when our shoulders pressed together against the cold. We sat like that for a long time, not talking, just existing in the same small space, and when I finally looked over at him, he was already looking at me. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The moment stretched long enough that it stopped being an accident and started being a choice, and then his phone buzzed with a message from Adrian asking if we'd seen his charger, and the spell broke, and we both laughed too loudly at nothing, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. That was the first almost. There would be more. I made myself a rule after that night. No more fire escapes, no more late-night talks, no more finding reasons to linger in doorways. Julian was my roommate's brother. He was staying temporarily. He was, as far as I knew, straight, or at least I had no evidence otherwise, and even if he wasn't, this was the kind of complication that could unravel a friendship I actually valued. Adrian's trust, my living situation, the fragile piece of my quiet life. I lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, Julian knocked on my door holding 2 plates of pasta he'd made from a recipe his mother used to make, and said, "You've been avoiding me," in a voice that wasn't accusing so much as genuinely confused and a little hurt. "I haven't," I said, which was a lie we both recognized immediately. "Theo. Just my name, quiet, direct. Did I do something?" And there it was, the thing about Julian that undid all my careful rules. He didn't let things go unspoken. He asked the question other people would have swallowed, and once he asked it, I couldn't lie to his face. "No," I said. "You didn't do anything. I just think I need to be careful." "Careful of what?" I didn't answer. He set the plates down on my desk, sat on the edge of my bed like it was the most natural thing in the world, and waited with a patience that felt like its own kind of pressure. "Careful of you," I finally admitted. "Careful of this." Something shifted in his face, surprise, then something warmer underneath it that he tried to smooth over too quickly for me to be sure I'd seen it at all. "Okay," he said softly. "Then we'll be careful together." We ate pasta on my bedroom floor that night, talking about nothing important, both of us circling the thing we weren't saying like it was a fire we knew better than to touch and couldn't stop standing near anyway. Adrian worked overnight shifts 3 times a week, which meant 3 nights a week the apartment belonged to just the 2 of us. Those nights became something neither of us named out loud, but both of us started arranging our schedules around. We'd cook together, badly. We'd watch movies neither of us paid attention to. We'd sit closer than roommates' brothers sit, close enough that our knees touched and neither of us moved away, close enough that I could smell the specific soap he used and would later associate, for years, with a feeling I didn't have a word for yet. One night in May, we were watching something forgettable, and Julian fell asleep with his head against my shoulder somewhere around the 2nd act. I didn't wake him. I sat there for almost 40 minutes, barely breathing, watching the muted light from the TV move across his face, feeling something settle into my chest that felt suspiciously like certainty. "I'm in trouble," I remember thinking. Real trouble. When he woke up, disoriented and apologetic, he didn't move away immediately. He looked at me instead, still half asleep, unguarded in a way he never was during daylight hours, and said, "You should have woken me up." "You look comfortable," I said. "I was," he said, and something in his voice made it sound like he meant more than the couch. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't even say anything else. But when he finally got up to go to bed, he squeezed my shoulder on his way past, and I sat in the dark living room for a long time afterward, trying to figure out how a person could feel that lit up by something so small that it was inevitable, I suppose, that Adrian would notice something. He caught it the way older brothers catch things, sideways, almost by accident. We were all three eating dinner together, one of the rare nights our schedules aligned, and at some point Adrian looked between us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You two are close," he said. Not a question. An observation, delivered lightly, but with a weight underneath it. "He's a good roommate," Julian said, too quickly. "I didn't say roommate," Adrian said, still looking between us. "I said close." The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of confession. Adrian wasn't stupid. He'd grown up with Julian. He knew his brother's tells better than either of us realized. But he didn't push. He just nodded slowly, like he was filing something away, and changed the subject to something about his shift the next day. Later, when Julian and I were alone in the kitchen doing dishes, he said, very quietly, "Do you think he knows?" "Knows what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what. "That I like you," Julian said, and then, like the words had cost him something to say, "that I've liked you for weeks." The plate I was holding nearly slipped out of my hands. "You've never said that," I managed. "I'm saying it now that we stood in that kitchen for a long moment. Dish towels forgotten, the water still running behind us. Julian's confession hung in the air between us like something fragile neither of us wanted to be the one to drop. "I like you too," I said finally, because it felt insane to let a truth like that sit unanswered. "I have for a while. I just didn't think that I would," he finished. "That it would be smart," I said. "Adrian, this apartment, all of it. Since when have you cared about smart?" There was a smile in his voice, even though his face was serious, searching mine for permission. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could count the small imperfections in his jaw. Close enough that his breath was warm against my mouth. Close enough that every rational thought I had about roommates and complications and being careful evaporated into something much simpler. I wanted him to close the last inch of distance between us. His hand came up to my jaw, gentle, testing. "Theo," he said, my name a question and an answer at once. And then, the bathroom door down the hall creaked open, and Adrian's footsteps started toward the kitchen, and we broke apart so fast the dish towel hit the floor, and by the time Adrian walked in we were both very intensely focused on rinsing plates that were already clean. He looked at us for a second too long, said nothing, grabbed a glass of water, and went back to bed. Julian and I looked at each other once he was gone. Both of us flushed, both of us laughing silently at the absurdity of it, both of us aware that whatever had almost happened was going to happen eventually, whether we were careful or not. But eventually didn't come as easily as either of us expected. Julian's thesis defense loomed closer, and with it came a version of him I hadn't met yet, withdrawn, exhausted, snapping at small things, and then apologizing too fast, like he was ashamed of his own stress. He started avoiding the kitchen at night, started closing his door again, started answering my texts in single words, if he answered at all. I told myself it was just the thesis. I told myself people get like that under pressure, that it had nothing to do with the almost kiss we'd never finished, that I was reading too much into silence because silence was easier to misread than anything else. But then I saw him one night talking to someone on the phone, laughing in a way he hadn't laughed with me in weeks, and something ugly and unfamiliar twisted in my chest. Jealousy. I'd never really felt it before, not like this, not this hot, unreasonable thing that made me want to know who was on the other end of that call, and why they got the version of him I thought I'd earned. "Who was that?" I asked, too casual, when he finally hung up. "Old friend from undergrad," Julian said, distracted, already turning back toward his room. "Why?" "No reason," I said, and hated how much I meant the opposite. He paused at his door, looking back at me with something unreadable in his face. "Theo, are we okay?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Are we?" He didn't answer. He just closed his door, softer than a slam, but somehow worse, and I stood in the hallway feeling the distance between us stretch into something that scared me more than closeness ever had. It came to a head on a Thursday night, 2 weeks before his defense, in the kind of fight that isn't really about what it's about. It started over something small, a dish left in the sink, an offhand comment, and escalated into something neither of us fully controlled. Weeks of unspoken tension came out sideways, dressed up as complaints about chores and schedules when really it was about the almost kiss we'd never resolved, the silence he'd retreated into, the jealousy I hadn't admitted to. "You've been distant for weeks," I finally said, my voice louder than I meant it. "Ever since that night in the kitchen. Ever since we almost. And now you can't even look at me. You think I don't know that?" Julian's voice cracked in a way that stopped my anger cold. "You think this is easy for me? I've never felt like this about anyone, Theo, and it terrifies me. My whole life I've been the careful one, the one who doesn't take risks, and you make me want to burn all of that down, and I don't know what to do with that. So you just disappear?" "So I panic," he said, quieter now, some of the fight draining out of him. "I panic and I push people away because it's easier than finding out they were never going to stay." The room went silent except for our breathing. I realized, watching him standing there with his arms wrapped around himself like he was trying to hold something together, that this wasn't about me at all. Not really. This was about whatever those rough couple of years Adrian had mentioned actually meant, whatever had taught Julian that wanting things was dangerous. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, softer now. "You don't know that." "I do," I said. "Try me." He didn't answer right away. He sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, and after a long moment, he started talking, really talking, in a way he hadn't before. He told me about the relationship in undergrad that had ended badly, publicly, in a way that had outed him to people who weren't ready to know before he was ready to tell them. He told me about the year afterward, the isolation, the way he'd rebuilt himself smaller and more careful, convinced that wanting someone that much was a kind of weakness that would eventually be used against him. "I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone in like that again," he said. "And then you happened, and I didn't even see it coming." I sat down next to him, close but not touching, giving him the space to finish. "I'm not him," I said. "Whoever hurt you. I'm not going to do that. I know that. Logically, I know that." He looked at me, eyes glassy in the low light. "But knowing something and believing it are different things." "Then let me help you believe it," I said. "Slowly, however long it takes." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was looking for the catch, the trick, the reason this couldn't be real. He didn't find one. "Okay," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Slowly." Which brings us back to where this story began. The kitchen, 1 a.m., his hand on my chest, the confession that finally broke the dam we'd both been holding back for months. "If you tell my brother I said that," Julian had whispered, "I will actually die." "Said what?" I'd asked, knowing exactly what. And he told me that he'd been thinking about me since his first day in that guest room, that he listened for my footsteps in the hallway, that he didn't know how to stop wanting something that scared him this much. This time, there was no interruption. No footsteps down the hall. No phone call breaking the spell. Just the two of us, finally standing still in the same moment instead of running from it. "I'm not going to make the first move," I said quietly. "Not this time. This one's yours if you want it." Julian looked at me for a long moment, searching, uncertain, brave in the specific way that terrified people are brave when they decide something is worth the risk anyway. Then he kissed me. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was slow, careful, the kind of kiss that feels like a question being answered rather than a question being asked. His hand slid from my chest to the back of my neck, and mine found his waist, and for a long moment the only sound in the apartment was the quiet hum of the refrigerator and our own unsteady breathing. When we finally pulled back, he pressed his forehead against mine, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for months. "Okay," he said, laughing softly, disbelieving. "Okay. That happened. That happened," I agreed. We didn't go further that night. Some doors are worth opening slowly. But we stayed in that kitchen for a long time afterward, talking in whispers, foreheads together, both of us finally exhaling something we'd been holding since the day he walked through our front door with 2 duffel bags and a face like he already regretted needing help. We told Adrian a week later, sitting him down together on a Sunday afternoon, both of us nervous in a way that felt almost funny in hindsight. He listened quietly while Julian explained, haltingly at first, then more steadily, how things had developed, how neither of us had planned it, how we understood if it made things complicated. When Julian finished, Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he looked between us, and to our enormous relief, he started laughing. "You two have been so obvious for 2 months," he said. "I've just been waiting for one of you to say something." "You knew?" I asked. "Theo, you started making 2 cups of tea every night in March." I'm a paramedic, not an idiot. The relief that flooded through the room was almost dizzying. Adrian didn't just accept it. He seemed genuinely happy, teasing Julian mercilessly about his terrible poker face, promising to never let either of us live down how long it took us to admit what had clearly been happening since the fire escape in April. Just don't be gross about it in the kitchen, he added. That's still shared space. We promised, and mostly kept that promise, though not entirely. Julian passed his thesis defense 2 weeks later, with a version of steadiness I hadn't seen in him before, the kind that comes from feeling, for the first time in a long time, like he had something solid to come home to. He found his own apartment eventually, a small place across town, but by then the distance didn't feel like distance at all. It felt like the natural next step of something that had already become permanent in every way that mattered. I think about that first night often. The doorway, the duffel bags, the face like he already regretted needing help. I think about how close we came to never becoming anything more than polite strangers sharing a bathroom. How easily this could have stayed unspoken if either of us had been just slightly more careful, slightly more afraid. But we weren't. Not in the end. And I've never been more grateful for a fire escape, a fight, a kitchen at 1 a.m., and a boy who was brave enough to say the thing neither of us knew how to say first. Some deals change your life the moment you sign them. Ours changed mine the moment I stopped being careful.